So folks, I'm back with another Titans card review. We had two cards kind of sneak into yesterday's reveals via various promotional videos and press assets. Both Mage cards and both point towards the archetype for Mage that was teased yesterday, which people are calling Rainbow Mage, which is all about playing, as you can see in the card behind me, various spell schools and getting some cool payoffs for that. So we're going to talk about both these cards. I will say this is probably less of a review and more of a like, hey, cool, look at these kind of video, because number one, these designs may not be final. These were put in promotional videos. You know, sometimes those are recorded ahead of time and before a final design pass, balance pass. You know, these might be 4 mana or 6 mana or something, might be changed between the promotional video recording and the official formal reveal. So number one, we can't be 100% confident that these are how these cards are going to turn out. Usually the effects will be the same more or less, and certainly the archetypes they suggest, we can pull some cool information there. But as far as final balance is concerned, can't say with 100% certainty. And then number two, in regards to this not being a real review, we also don't have a complete picture of this package just yet. I thought yesterday's reveal, this guy, the Inquisitive Creation, might be a one-off. He seemed like something that could maybe just be a fun little toss-in, but it's clear now that he's actually a part of this package or archetype, which we're going to need to see more of a full picture of probably to have a good assessment on how strong these cards can all be together, because I don't know that we have like the big payoff centerpiece for this just yet. And typically with reveals lately, they do reveal cards in packages now, so interesting that the Creation kind of snuck in on his own. Now that said, let's talk about here the Wisdom of Norgannon. Just remember, not final, and I'm not going to give a score on these just yet. And if they do change later, of course, we'll cycle back and talk about them at that time. But this is a 5 mana spell for Mage, an arcane spell. It's going to draw you 2 cards, and it costs 1 less for each different spell school you've cast this game. So another card that improves as you cast more spell schools. Now for Mage, there are 3 very typical spell schools they have access to. Of course, Frost, Fire, Arcane, as we've seen with things like the quest line for Mage in the past. Mage also currently in Standard has access to a single Shadow spell with Reverberations that they just got in the mini set that makes a copy of a minion. So that could be 4 base spell schools for Mage in Standard. That means they need a little bit of additional help to get this to like 0 mana, for instance, which of course we're getting a card, Molten Rune. This was the other one that was teased yesterday, and this will add a random spell to your hand. And that does not say random Mage spell like Babbling Book. This is a random spell, which means it can come from any class, which means of course you might hit holy spells, nature spells, fel spells, etc. to open up your spell school pool, which is very fun to say. So this is one way you might be able to generate some additional schools to further pay off these 2 payoff cards, these 2 payoff cards, which will be helpful. Now we're going to talk about the efficiency of this type of play, the consistency of this type of play as we get into Molten Rune. But for Wisdom of Norgannon itself, the 3 base Mage spells I think are going to be pretty easy to hit consistently, which would push this down to a 2 mana draw 2, which that's pretty solid these days. Not great. Yes, it's better than Arcane Intellect, but there are great card draw engines in Hearthstone these days. Draw 2 for 2 is just solid these days. Not crazy. I think you start to get more excited about this card when it gets to 1 or 0 mana, which do seem like a little bit harder breakpoints to hit. Now, I will say for the Inquisitive Creation, I thought this card started to feel good at 2 and 3 damage. 3 damage in particular for the Creation feels like, oh yeah, that's a great sweet spot. That's going to deal with a lot of various boards. So I think it'll be easier to pump up the Creation more consistently and more quickly to get it to a point where you're happy with it, basically, than a point where you're happy with Norgannon. And I do worry sometimes you're going to get stuck with hands that are a little clunky for the Wisdom of Norgannon, and it's like, man, I'm going to have to spend 3 or 4 mana on this Norgannon just to find the other spell schools that I want to enable the rest of my rainbow cards. So sometimes the card draw is what you're using to check all of these other boxes off for your other cards. So the fact that it has that conditionality built in itself, that might be a little bit challenging for this one. And starting at such a high cost, I do worry sometimes that it's going to get in its own way, if you will, because of that cost, particularly because you aren't super excited to spend 3 or 4 on this. Certainly, maybe by 2 you're a little bit happier. There's also just, for both of these, really the question about finding the stuff on time and having the mana to play the stuff, because not every spell school spell you have is going to be like 0 or 1 mana that you can weave into turns really easily. Sometimes you might have to spend 3 mana to play one of these spells. And are you going to have time to unlock all of this in a timely fashion? Are you going to get the creation done by turn 4? Are you going to get the Norgannon done by the time you need it and run out of resources? Maybe the card draw is a little okay to play on 6, 7, 8 or something as you've started to exhaust your hand a little bit more, and it's not as big of a concern there. But it still runs into its own problems where I need to draw the cards that I don't currently have. So I don't know. I guess when I look at a card like this, I almost wish it had a lower base cost and it drew more cards as you got more spell schools, so that you could more easily kind of weave this into your early turns if you don't hit what you need early, so that you can kind of replace this card and try to hit that other stuff to get the engine moving quicker. Because otherwise, if the engine's not moving already, if you're not spinning those gears on spell schools, this isn't going to help you get there any faster, because it's going to stay so expensive. So we'll see. I feel like, efficient card draw is great. That's always important for decks like this, but just worried about lining all of that up on time. And I don't know that this next card necessarily solves that problem either. Here's the Molten Rune, 3 mana spell for Mage. It is a fire spell, importantly. It has a Forge effect, which, quick reminder on Forge. For Forge, you can upgrade your cards by dragging them onto your deck and spending 2 mana. Costs 2 mana to upgrade them, then they get better. In this case, it will cast twice after it has been forged. The effect itself deals 3 damage and adds a random spell to your hand. So at a base level, 3 mana, deal 3 and generate a thing. It's actually pretty solid, I think. I think, especially if you care about generating that resource because of spell schools or otherwise, it's not bad, right? Just kill 3/3 on board or whatever, get a thing, fill your turn. And then if you pump this up and you effectively spend 5 mana, now you don't have to spend the 5 mana all at once. You can weave the 2 mana in on turn 2 and then play this on turn 3 on curve, which is pretty cool. Then you can send 6 damage to a minion if you need to, face certainly if you want to get some chip damage, and generate 2 resources on turn 3. And then hopefully one of those is giving you the spell school that you need, giving you a good play for the mid game, whatever it is. This pool of random spells, of course, gigantic, enormous. You're very often going to hit more Fire, Frost, and Arcane spells that you probably didn't need. You're sometimes going to hit non-typed spells that don't give you any school advantage at all. And then sometimes you're going to hit like 8 mana spells that are just really hard to play. Quality of average spells, the average quality of random spells, as we know, can be pretty darn low in Hearthstone when there's no like filter on them. If it's that's a random spell that costs 3 or less or something, that might really help you add some consistency. But you're going to whiff on this with stuff that's not useful in many cases and just kind of raw value. But I like the curve aspect for this, from that 2 to 3. I like the fact that it has damage. I actually think this card can be independently good. It's not something that has to be played in a rainbow deck. Can be support for rainbow decks, but you don't necessarily need it. For a deck that's just looking for damage, spending 5 mana total in the early game, getting some damage out early, and generating more resources, that might be a pattern that's okay for some decks out there. So I actually think as a rainbow enabler, this card's probably super inconsistent and really awkward, even if generating 2 cards. You're spending a lot of mana to set that up, and your payoff is not even there. I want cards that are like 1 mana, add a random holy and fell spell to your hand, and it's called like Tap into the Cosmos or something, and it shows Norgannon, grabbing some cool stuff. I mean, if we look at the artwork for Norgannon, it's clear that he's in some way or another paying off the rainbow fantasy here for Mage. I do wonder if initially Norgannon was connected to the rainbow archetype. When we look at his abilities now, they don't really support the rainbow archetype at all. They don't interact in any way at all. Particularly the Progenitor's Power. I do wonder if this ability for Norgannon used to some way say like deal 1 damage, upgrade for, or maybe deal 1 damage for each spell school you've cast this game, that sort of thing. But maybe it just didn't feel good or didn't work well for the deck. But it might just be flavor too, that me just tapping into all these various magical energies, and even though it's not directly connected mechanically, still reflecting the idea here for this archetype. Anyway, I just worry about all this lining up and coming together in a cohesive fashion, and like how long is it taking to get all these spell schools in play? how many weird, unsynergistic, awkward cards are you playing along the way? It's like, oh man, I gotta play this stupid holy spell that I don't even need or doesn't do anything good for me just to make my cards feel good to play. I have major concerns about that. So I think we need something to really bring the spice to this. Based on the cards we've seen so far, I don't know that it gets there. I do think Inquisitive Creation looks like a pretty good payoff card, but still just a lot of clunkiness, a lot of lineups here that have to happen to make things work really well for this package, I fear. So we'll see. Like I said, I'm not going to score these cards just yet. This was more about just showcasing what we can see and talking about stuff while we're hyped about it. We'll see what else comes out in this package. Hopefully it gets revealed before too long. I think the Mage reveals, let's see. Mage reveals are scheduled for July 21st. Okay, so we may not see the rest of this for a month, but gives us plenty of time to think about it and speculate on it in the meantime. But I'm curious what you guys think. Does this feel as clunky to you as it does to me? Are you as worried about this? Do you think there can be a payoff? What might that payoff look like? Maybe the Titan Keeper for Mage does something insane based on various spell schools. Maybe it's not Yogg, I guess, because he's not a Titan Keeper, but imagine a Yogg-Saron that said cast a random spell for every spell school you've played this game, or that sort of effect could be really cool. So curious what you think, but share those thoughts in the comments below. Thanks much for indulging me as we take a look at these kind of early unfinal cards and speculate a lot of what this archetype might do and might be like. So that's it. Love you, thank you, and until next time, game on.